Greetings, good evening, and welcome to a special joint meeting of the Glendale Water and Power Commission and the Sustainability Commission. I'm joined here in the chambers with Chairman Alec Bartrosif. Good evening, Alec. And we have some of your commissioners on the line as well, and my fellow commissioners. Today is September 9th, 2021. To help slow the transmission of COVID-19 and protect the health and safety of the community, City Council, as well as board and commission meetings, will continue to be closed to the public for in-person attendance. The public is encouraged to watch and participate from the safety of their homes to practice social distancing. Meetings are broadcast live on Glendale TV, viable on Spectrum Cable, Channel 6, and AT&T UVerse, Channel 99. Meetings are also streamed live in high definition, HD, on the city's webpage, glendaleca.gov/live, on youtube.com/myglendale, and on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire devices using a free app called Screenweave, and choosing Glendale TV from the menu. For public comments and questions during the meeting, please call 818-937-8100. Public comments on a specific agenda item will be taken when that agenda item is discussed. Next item, please.
1, roll call. Before I proceed with the roll call, and for the record, Commissioner Law will not be participating in tonight's discussion due to a conflict of interest. Glendale Water and Power Commission roll call. Commissioner Jasmadarian.
Here.
Commissioner Kadikian.
Here.
Commissioner Peterson.
Here.
President Flanagan.
Here.
Roll call for the Sustainability Commission. Commissioner Kartunian.
Present.
Commissioner Kanjian.
Present.
Commissioner Peterson.
Pinkerton, here.
Thank you. Vice Chair Wenner.
Here.
Chairperson Bartusov,
Here.
ex officio Gang,
Here.
ex officio Prado.
Here.
Next item, please.
2, reports information. 2A, community meeting regarding the partial circulated draft environmental impact report for the Grayson Repowering project.
And we have a staff presentation.
Yes, President Flanagan, Chairperson Bartrosov, members of commission. I'd like to introduce 3 individuals that will be presenting to us today. The first person is Dave Tatatosian. He's been involved with this project for many years, and he's acting project manager. He's a principal of the Clean Energy Consulting Partners. Dave is a native of California, holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical and Nuclear Engineering and an MS in Nuclear Engineering from UC Berkeley, and is a California Registered Professional Engineer. Dave has provided testimony in both California Energy Commission and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission proceedings. During his career, Dave has been involved with projects involving gas and steam turbines, reciprocating engines, cogeneration, nuclear, solar PV and thermal, geothermal, and energy storage. Next individual I'd like to introduce is Michael Weber. He's a senior principal scientist with Stantec. He has a BS in environmental studies from UC Santa Barbara and possesses more than 20 years of California Environmental Quality Act experience. Michael's experience includes, but is not limited to, the environmental impact analysis for energy generation, transmission, and storage projects. Michael is the city's consultant, technical lead assisting with the preparation of the environmental impact report and has been involved with the project since 2015. Lastly, but not least, Carl Laney is a regional manager for the Permitting and Compliance Services Division of the Montrose Environmental Group. He has overseen environmental analysis and permitting in support of Glendale's integrated resource plans and proposed project Alternative 8 described in the environmental impact report, with the focus on air quality, greenhouse gas, health risk, and AQMD permitting and compliance. Mr. Laney provides similar permitting and compliance services for other local municipal utilities, including the cities of Riverside, Anaheim, and Colton, all of which are regulated by the South Coast AQMD. Mr. Laney is also a member of the South Coast Best Available Control Technology, BACT, Scientific Review Committee, and several regulatory development working groups that are sponsored by the Air District. And I'll leave it to Dave to start the presentation.
Good evening, President Flanagan, Chairperson Bartusov, fellow members of the Glendale Water and Power, and
We cannot hear Dave.
Got it. Okay, sorry about that. I'll start again. Good evening, President Flanagan, Chairperson Bartusov, fellow members of the Glendale Water and Power and Sustainability Commissions, and members of the public. So tonight we're going to talk about Grayson Repower, and probably the foremost question in people's minds are, why are we repowering Grayson with a thermal generation component when we're all worried about climate change? And the simple answer to that is because there's inadequate alternate resources to ensure reliability. Building new transmission lines into Glendale is infeasible. If you look at the current transmission capacity that comes into Glendale, that's about 200 megawatts. The historical peak in Glendale is 346 megawatts. GWP's resources that are non-thermal resources that are expected to come online over the next coming years is 50 megawatts of local demand response energy efficiency in the virtual power plant that came out of the Clean Energy Rfp, plus 72 megawatts of additional capacity on existing transmission that GWP will have access to by being a participant in the Intermountain Power Project Repower. If you add all that up, that's still short of the 346 megawatts. So something more is needed. And in addition, there needs to be margin to cover contingencies and to meet peak load. And that's what gets us to needing additional generation at Grayson. And when I say additional, I mean in addition to clean energy, because what's being proposed is to replace what's there. If you look at the industry accepted reliability standards for what Glendale will have with the transmission access, you would need 172 megawatts of resources available to cover contingencies, the N-1, the N-1-1-1, or sometimes called the N-2. Next slide, please. So as a result, when we went to City Council back in 2018, the EIR was not certified, and GWP was asked to look for cleaner alternatives. And that led to the Clean Energy Rfp. And out of that process came two new alternatives, what we're calling alternatives 7 and 8. The original EIR addressed 5 alternatives, plus the originally proposed project, the Siemens Repower. And so this partially recirculated draft environmental report does two things, really. Okay, it updates the original EIR for the original proposed project, the Siemens Repower, to address 2 new topics that CEQA law now requires that weren't required at the time, energy and wildfire. And then in addition, it evaluates 2 new alternatives in addition to the original 5. And that's what we're calling Alternative 7, Alternative 8. Alternative 7 involves Tesla batteries and Wärtsilä engines to provide the thermal component. Alternative 8 is the same Tesla batteries and a refurbishment of the existing units 8A, B, and C. Next slide, please. This is kind of the schedule we have been through. The notice of preparation for the original proposed project goes back to 2016. There was a public review period during the latter part of 2017, and it was presented to the City Council for adoption in April of 2018. Out of that, the Clean Energy RFP was issued in May, and the results presented to the City Council in July of 2019. We've now done the work to develop the new alternatives, done the environmental analysis, the conceptual engineering, and so the partially recirculated draft EIR. I think for simplicity, we're just going to refer to it as EIR going forward tonight. But that is now out for public comment. The public comment period was lengthened to 60 days, and public comments are due by October 8th. So the original proposed project that was subject of the original EIR back in 2018, that retained Unit 9. Unit 9 is a simple cycle gas turbine that was built in 2003. It demolished all the other units, units 1 through 8, and then in their place, it built 2 new combined cycle units and 2 new simple cycle units. So the benefits that were set forth for the original project was to maintain reliable service, keep rates affordable, comply with the renewable portfolio standard while they used thermal generation. One part of the requirement was that to be flexible generation to be able to accommodate the intermittency of solar and wind resources that were being imported. And then meet the electrical demands of the city if the city was separated from the grid. That happened back during the Sylmar earthquake, and Grayson was able to carry the load. That was one of the requirements. And so a lot of hours, operating hours, was included in that air permitting for that proposed project, so the units could carry the city if needed. Then lastly, replacing the older units with cleaner technology, and then providing a local source of generation. That kind of ties into the point I made before. And lastly, eliminating the use of potable water for power generation. This is an overview of the existing Grayson power plant. You see the red dashed line that surrounds the structures colored in yellow, and that red dashed line is the limits of the project. In the lower right-hand corner, what is not in yellow, that's Unit 9. That is currently in operation, and it will stay in operation. What is colored in yellow is what would be demolished either for the original proposed project or either of the two alternatives that we're talking about. What's inside the white dashed line is what we're going to show next, which is the general arrangement for the originally proposed Siemens Repower. What's outside the white line there to the right side, what you're seeing is H and I, that area was going to be demolished, and then there was an admin building, warehouse, workshop, other ancillary structures that were going to be going in there, gas compressors. So next slide, please. This is an overview of what was originally proposed back in 2018. So on the left, you have the two simple cycle gas turbines. On the right, you have the two other gas turbines with their heat recovery steam generators and the two steam turbines sitting in a building in between. Next slide, please. Since April of 2018, there have been a number of things that have occurred that have influenced the project development. This is, if you will, a table of contents of what we're going to go through next, just to cover these points. So I won't go through them in detail. The subsequent slides will do that. So I'm going to turn over to Carl a second. Okay.
Good evening, Chair, President, and members of the commissions. At the time the analysis for the original proposed project were being completed, South Coast also embarked on rule development that would affect power generating facilities in the South Coast Basin, including the generating units at the Grayson power plant. The objective of the rule is to make existing legacy power generating systems as clean or as low emitting as new systems that would come into the basin. So basically we talk about best available control technology that's usually applied to new emission sources. This rule basically applies the equivalent of that to existing sources. Only Unit 9 can meet those emission rates right now, and this is primarily a NOx rule and an ammonia slip rule. It is feasible to modify Units 8A, B, and C with enhanced emission control systems, maybe some tuning, I understand, and also with emission monitoring systems that are designed to accurately read the lower emission rates that the rule would require. It's not practical or feasible to do the same to boilers 1 through 5 for various reasons. It's different technology. It's harder to get to where they need to be, but also the boilers don't provide the same kind of utility, operating utility that the gas turbines provide. To comply with Rule 1135, the city has 3 choices. The first of which is to modify units to meet the standards and to do so by January of 2024. Again, Unit 9 is covered. Units 8A, B, and C would require modification if you were to take that route. Alternatively, you could replace the units with new generation to meet those standards, again, by 2024, or finally to retire the existing units and forfeit power generating capability. The city does have an obligation to notify and submit applications to the Air District by June of 2022, and again, come into compliance by January of 2024.
Okay, another significant thing that took place was the Clean Energy RFP. That RFP went out to the marketplace, and it really had very few limits on what could be proposed, but there were a few, and they were critical. One was that it had to be local generation, that it couldn't rely on transmission because Glendale's pipeline to bring electricity in was already booked. Had to be at least 1 megawatt, and it had to be commercially demonstrated technology. So, there were no one-offs for science projects. There were 34 proposals that were received, and out of that, Glendale selected the following. Some of the proposals, people were asked to increase the size of them so that Glendale could get more. Franklin Energy, the demand response, that is in place, and in fact, tomorrow will be the first occurrence of calling on Franklin to exercise demand response to reduce Glendale's load. Lime Energy, that contract is in place, and that's energy efficiency. Sunrun, I think, as you know, is still in contract negotiations. And then there's the Tesla batteries and the Wartsila thermal generation. The 2019 Integrated Resources Plan, that was presented to City Council in July of 19. That was built on what came out of the Clean Energy RFP. So it included what came out of the local generation, clean energy, as well as the batteries and the thermal generation. The IRP looks at two things. It looks at not only what do you plan to do generation-wise, but it looks also at what do you expect to happen with load. And there's two aspects to load. One, what is the peak demand that you have to serve? And then secondly, what is the overall amount of energy that you have to serve? So energy demand is expected to grow. How it's expected to grow slowly, but that's based on the assumption that all the energy efficiency, demand response, and local comes into play. And peak load is expected to grow also. And where this growth is coming from is electrification of both transportation and infrastructure. There's the Intermountain Power Project in Utah. GWP is a participant, one of the owners of IPP. Today, IPP is a coal-fired power plant, and the plan is to repower it as a gas turbine combined cycle power plant. Part of the IPP project brings with it transmission capacity on the Southern Transmission System. Some of the participants chose not to participate in the repower. And so that made available some transmission capacity that GWP was able to obtain. And so there's 72 megawatts of additional transmission capacity that will become available in 2027 to GWP that wasn't even on the table back in the original proposed project. When IPP is repowered, the plan is to run those gas turbines initially on a mix of 70% gas, 30% hydrogen, and then transition over time to 100% hydrogen. And then what would happen is local solar and wind resources would be used to take local water, turn it into hydrogen, and then use that hydrogen as a fuel source for the gas turbines. SB 100 got enacted, and SB 100 basically required that utilities procure 60% of their electricity from renewable resources by 2030, and then by 2045 that would increase to 100%. And then the City Council requested that GWP perform a 100% clean by 2030 study. Was it possible to get to 100% clean renewable resources as a source of supply by 2030? That was presented earlier this year, and basically the study concluded that it was possible to get to 89% by 2030, and along with that there was going to be a required rate increase to cover the resources. And then how would we get to the other 11%? So the other 11% was either going to require new transmission to bring in more renewables, and then the additional renewables with storage, so that we need the storage to address nighttime load that would come over that new transmission, or it's local renewables with storage, or it's using renewable natural gas at Grayson. And then while not a generation issue per se, there was the September 2019 rolling blackout. And that was precipitated by an equipment failure within the GWP transmission distribution system. But what came out of that then was, right now, the Kellogg switching station at the Utility Operations Center, which is where the Grayson power plant is also located. The UOC is basically, Kellogg switching station is basically a nexus for the entire GWP system. So out of that event, the decision was made to add the Glendale switching station to the project. And so that would provide additional resiliency. While it wouldn't be a complete 100% redundancy to Kellogg, it would provide a lot more resiliency to the GWP system and make it more fault tolerant. And so that got added to alternatives 7 and 8. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Weber.
Thank you, Dave, and good evening, President and Commissioners. There has also been a change in air quality and greenhouse gas emissions occurring at the Grayson power plant since the original EIR. In 2018, when that original EIR was considered, landfill gas was being combusted in the Grayson boilers at the Grayson power plant, and that's what our air quality and greenhouse gas conditions evaluated and assumed in that original 2018 EIR. Since that time, in April 2018, the city has discontinued combusting landfill gas at the boilers. It is now being flared at the Shoal Canyon landfill itself. So as part of the updated EIR, we did look at those differences in those air quality and greenhouse gas conditions, looking at both scenarios and evaluated both scenarios, and did conclude that both the air quality and greenhouse gas emissions impacts of the proposed project under either scenario would be less than significant. The new alternatives that Dave spoke to have now also been evaluated in the alternative section of the updated EIR. That is Alternative 7 and Alternative 8. Alternative 7 includes 5 Wärtsilä reciprocating internal combustion engine units with a generation capacity of approximately 93 megawatts. Also includes a battery energy storage system producing 75 megawatts with a storage capacity of 300 megawatt hours, as well as a new Glendale switching station to help with reliability as well. Alternative 8 has a lot of similarities as Alternative 7. It would include the same battery energy storage system as well as the Glendale switching station. Just replaces the 5 Wärtsilä reciprocating internal combustion engines with retaining and refurbishing the existing units 8A and 8BC generation units. In 2018, Confluence Park had not yet been developed. This is a new park that is located just southwest of the Grayson power plant, sandwiched right in between the power plant, the Los Angeles River, and Highway 134. So in the updated EIR, we did consider that park as a new sensitive noise receptor, as well as a key observation point for potential aesthetics impacts. So we did analyze that receptor in the updated EIR for all issue areas and resource categories as well. In 2018, when the city presented the final EIR to City Council to consider certification, and City Council requested staff look at cleaner energy alternatives, City Council also requested city staff to consult with the Glendale Historical Society related to demolition of the boiler building itself. Pursuant with those consultations, the city has elected to treat the boiler building as a discretionary historical resource under the California Environmental Quality Act. The city has updated and recirculated the cultural resources section of the EIR and has also incorporated new cultural resource related mitigation measures to the EIR as well. And here's a summary of those mitigation measures that are added into the 2021 EIR update. That includes doing a historic American engineering record survey of the boiler building. installation of an informational plaque on Flower Street, preserving a piece of the salvaged equipment from the boiler building for informational display. And the city will also display photographs of the historic boiler building in a publicly accessible location on the city campus. That fourth bullet is not in the draft EIR right now. The city is committing to add that into the final EIR as well. However, despite those mitigation measures, demolition of the boiler building would constitute a significant and unavoidable impact under CEQA. Want to also note that the boiler building would be required to be removed for the proposed project and any and all alternatives involving new generators or battery storage at the Grayson Power Plant. The updated EIR also includes a noise update as well. That included more quantitative construction noise analysis and modeling for the proposed project. Previously in 2018, it only looked at nighttime concrete pouring, as well as potential vibrations from pile driving. The update now looks at the worst case or noisiest demolition or construction activities as well, and quantifies those and determined that those construction impacts would also be less than significant. Also evaluated noise impacts on Confluence Park that we just previously discussed, and updated the noise technical report and analyzed potential operation phase noise impacts of alternative 7 and 8 quantitatively as well. The updated EIR includes a determination that there would either be no or less than significant impacts to air quality, agriculture and forestry resources, biological resources, geology and soils, greenhouse gas emissions, energy, land use and planning, mineral resources, population and housing, public services, recreation, tribal cultural resources, utilities and service systems, environmental justice, socioeconomics, and wildfire. You will note there is a bullet on there for cultural resources. Please forgive us, that is in error and a typo, and we'll talk about cultural resources in the next slide as well. All right, EIR determined that there would be less than significant impacts with mitigation to aesthetics, hazards and hazardous materials, noise, paleontological resources, and transportation and traffic. There would be significant and an unavoidable impact to cultural resources related to demolition of the boiler building that the city is treating as a discretionary historic resource. Just a summary of the mitigation measures that have been integrated or incorporated into the EIR. I'm not going to read through all of these. I just want to note that the ones in black text are from the original EIR. The mitigation measures shown in blue text are ones that were added to the updated EIR. And that does include these cultural resource related mitigation measures we just spoke to on a previous slide. And hazards and hazardous materials related mitigation measures. And noise related mitigation measures, largely related to a requirement to meet specific noise limits for different components of the equipment that are either guaranteed by the vendors or equipment manufacturers, or have been determined based on noise modeling expertise to be reasonable standards to be able to meet, even if they are conservative. Paleontological resources, some new mitigation measures to do worker training prior to start of construction, as well as having a paleontological monitor and a plan in place to handle and manage any inadvertent paleontological discoveries, as well as a range of transportation-related measures during the construction phase. Again, all of these mitigation measures are in the EIR and can be referred to there as well. Okay, the alternatives that were evaluated in the EIR, 8 of them total, really 7, and we'll explain this. The first 5 were evaluated in the 2018 EIR, and 7 and 8 were added to the 2021 updated EIR. So those alternatives include, number 1, the no project alternative, essentially taking no action and doing nothing. The second one is an energy storage project alternative, essentially including no generation or no new transmission, just storing energy. Number 3 was an alternative energy project that would involve generating renewable energy, likely outside of the city, utility scale, PV, solar, wind energy projects, and constructing a new transmission line to bring those resources into the city. Number 4 was a 150 megawatt thermal generation project. Alternative 5 was a 200 megawatt thermal generation project. Alternative 6 was a Tesla battery storage and Wärtsilä reciprocating internal combustion engines alternative. As engineering started to look at that in terms of site layouts for the environmental team to evaluate potential impacts, it was determined that the siting of that alternative was not going to be feasible from an engineering standpoint, and it was therefore excluded from further analysis. Alternative 7 is the same equipment. It's just in a slightly different configuration than was envisioned for number 6. And those include the alternatives that we just talked about in previous slides. Number 7 being the 75 megawatts of energy storage or battery storage, as well as a 93 megawatts from the 5 engines, or alternative 8 that is refurbishing 8A, 8BC, then also includes the energy storage and the new switching station as well. There were a range of alternatives that were considered, but just not evaluated in the EIR. There is section 5, I believe, of the EIR that explains all of these in substantial detail, as well as the reasonings as to why they were not carried forward into a more detailed evaluation in the EIR. So those included that alternative 6, a range of different power plant site alternatives, project technology alternatives, including combustion generation technologies, conventional boiler and steam turbines, large simple cycle combustion turbine generators, large combined cycle combustion turbine generators, alternative fuel technologies, and even power plant cooling alternatives as well. The comparison of the proposed project against alternatives 7 and 8 for some key components that really help to summarize some key differences. The total storage and generation of the proposed project is 262 megawatts. That comes entirely from thermal generation with no energy storage. Alternative 7 has a total of 168 megawatts, 75 from the energy storage and 93 from thermal generation. Alternative 8, 176 megawatts total, 75 from the energy storage and 101 megawatts from the thermal generation. There's a substantial difference in the natural gas combustion between the proposed project and both alternative 7 and 8, measured in millions of BTU per year. You can see for the proposed project, it is almost 10 million with the metrics there. Alternative 7 is just over 1 million, and alternative 8 is a little bit more than 1.2. But you can tell just looking at that, you're looking at 80, 90% reduction in natural gas combustion. That's a function of the reduction in thermal generation capacity, but also a reduction in the number of proposed operating hours that Dave explained in the previous slide for the proposed project. So that's why you see a substantial reduction in the natural gas combustion. As a result of the decrease in natural gas combustion, you also have a substantial decrease in the carbon dioxide equivalent emissions for the proposed project and the alternatives, where the proposed project expressed in metric tons per year would be almost 500,000. Whereas alternative 7 is slightly above 50,000, and alternative 8 is slightly above 60,000 or less than 70,000. So big reductions. Also wanted to express the differences in terms of health risks. And these health risks are expressed pursuant with CEQA in the number of predicted or modeled cancer cases in a population of 1 million. So the threshold of significance would be 10. If you had a population of 10 in 1 million expected to get cancer, that would be considered a potentially significant impact under CEQA. For the proposed project, it was 0.91. For alternative 7, the health risk is even reduced substantially more to 0.5, and alternative 8, 0.014. So you are seeing some marked reductions in the health risks as well. Okay, sorry, skipped one slide there. This is just a comparison of the project and all 7 or 8 of the alternatives that were evaluated in the EIR. Again, those first 5, 1 through 5, were evaluated in the 2018 EIR. 7 and 18 were added in the updated EIR. The blue text in here just shows the changes that were made or the updates to the table from the 2018. So the 2018 is black text. Anything that is shown in blue was added. So I'm just going to focus on a minute or two on 7 and 8. Again, all of the detail in this table is included in section 5 of the EIR. So alternative 7, compared to the proposed project, and these potential impacts were qualified for comparison purposes as being potentially less, similar, or greater environmental impacts than the proposed project. So we have the potential for less environmental impacts to aesthetics, air quality, energy, greenhouse gas emissions, and noise, and no greater environmental impacts than the proposed project. All of the other environmental resource categories would have similar impacts to the proposed project. For alternative 8, there would be less potential environmental impacts to aesthetics, air quality, energy, and greenhouse gas emissions. There would be greater potential environmental impacts to noise, and all of the remaining environmental categories would have similar environmental impacts to noise. To the proposed project. I did want to mention in noise that the modeling for that was very conservative. The level of engineering design was not as advanced as the proposed project or the other alternative, with specific equipment being selected. So we didn't have access to equipment and vendor guarantees, and had to build in what we believed were some reasonable but conservative assumptions for noise levels on that. So that's why you see that as being higher, but we believe that in reality that it would likely be very similar to the proposed project. Just some photo simulations of the proposed project, as well as alternative 7 and alternative 8 we will get in the next slide. This is from what is referred to as key observation point 1 considered in the EIR. This is from the corner of Fairmont Avenue and Flower Street. The image on the left shows a simulation of what the proposed project would look like. The photograph on the on the right hand side shows a photo simulation of what alternative 7 would look like. Simulation of the proposed project and alternative 8. Again, this is from the same key observation point at the corner of Fairmont Avenue and Flower Street. The proposed project is shown on the left, and alternative 8 is shown on the right. Okay, the CEQA path forward and how anybody that is interested can provide a comment on the 2021 partially recirculated draft EIR. This is where we are right now, anticipating to respond to comments and notice a final EIR in November of this year, as well as presenting that final EIR to the Glendale Water and Power and Sustainability Commissions again, anticipating that to occur in November as well. followed by presenting the final EIR to Glendale City Council to consider for certification, also anticipated to be in November of 2021 as well. I won't read through the slide on how to comment. It is on here. Eric Kraus with the City Community Development Department and the Planning Division is the contact. His address is on here. His telephone number is on here. His email address is on here. And comments must be received no later than 5 p.m. on October 8th, 2021. And the city will review and respond to all comments received. That includes questions and comments received tonight as well. And thank you very much. I'm going to turn it back over to Dave.
So we've come full circle back to the original question, and that is why repower Grayson, given the challenges we face with climate change. And as I said in the beginning, it comes back to a question of needing to meet load and reliability. GWP takes climate change and renewable energy seriously, and you just have to look at the last 20 years of what GWP has been doing. They started a solar solutions program back in 2002 that resulted in 20 megawatts of rooftop solar being built within the city. That was all prior to the Clean Energy Rfp. There was net metering programs, feed-in tariffs. There's demand reduction through the Ice Bear program, as well as energy efficiency programs. So GWP, and there's street lighting. So you can go. There's a lot of programs that GWP has been doing over the last 20 years, try and reduce load, as well as generate things renewably within the city. And then we did the Clean Energy RFP. And as I said earlier, that was open to everything. And out of that is expected to result about 50 megawatts. You total it all up, and it just doesn't come up enough to serve peak load and ensure reliability. So as much as GWP's got a responsibility to manage the utility responsibly with the environment in mind, it also has a responsibility to serve the residents and assure them a reliable source of electricity. And all those programs and what they're able to import and the limitation on new transmission, basically not being able to build it, limits what you're able to import using only renewable energy resources. And so the backup, all that's left really is locally generated power, and that's going to come from thermal. And so hence we're here. If you do the math and you add, like I said, the 200 megawatts of imports and the 72 megawatts that comes online in 27 and the 50 megawatts that comes out of clean energy, you come up short on the 346. And you've got to be able to cover contingencies, because as happened this summer, you had wildfires to the north. Those wildfires may have been hundreds of miles away from Glendale, but it resulted in curtailing the transmission lines that the power that GWP obtains from the north that comes south to Glendale. That capacity that got curtailed. And so there needs to be a way to back that up. And when your major sources are all imported over transmission lines, that limits your ability and really forces a local solution. So what we're proposing with alternatives 7 and 8 gives these 75 megawatts of batteries, and that can be used for spinning reserve, that can be used to support load. But those batteries, just like what you buy in the store, have a finite life, and then you need to recharge them. And the ability to recharge the batteries is contingent on how much spare capacity there is at night in the transmission lines. And so the combination of the batteries and the thermal generation provides you the level of reliability, the backup resources that we think are needed to ensure a reliable supply of electricity. So with that, that concludes our presentation, and I think at this point it's open to questions and comments. Thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate it.
Well, thank you all for your presentation and all the work that you've done thus far. And just a procedural question, I guess, for our attorneys. Are we seeking any sort of a resolution from each commission this evening, or a recommendation to anybody, or we are just commenting and hearing public comment as well?
Yes, Commission President, Commission Chair, we are just receiving comments. As indicated, those comments will be captured. And each of the subject matter experts here is carefully taking comments as it pertains to their their area of expertise. And all of those comments and responses to those comments will be incorporated into the final EIR, which is expected to be released in November.
Right.
And then the staffs will be bringing back that final EIR in November to the commissions. At that time, the staff will be seeking recommendation from the joint commissions.
But the EIR will be certified based on the proposed project as well as the alternatives. It will not specify, through this process, we will not specify which alternative.
You may, yes, that would be
We
part
may.
of your recommendation, yes.
President Flanagan, but to clarify, not this evening. When it comes back to you in November, we'll ask for your recommendation regarding the final EIR, including this partially recirculated portion and responses to comments. But for today, we're just gathering comments
Very good.
from yourselves and the public.
Very good. So I think we'll start with commissioner comments from the GWP Commission. Is that okay if we do that?
Correct, yes.
Chairman Bartrosef, and then we'll shift over to the Sustainability Commission. So with that, let's start with Commissioner Jasmadarian. Questions, comments?
Here we go. I do have a question, and it's about the contingency area. So with alternatives 7 and 8, we're fine after 2027 with the contingency. What happens in the few years after either alternative 7 or 8 is built and before 2027? What would we use as the contingency? We borrow from LADWP or Burbank, something along those lines.
You want to do it, or we're not okay after 2027, that when that 72 megawatts becomes available, after 2027, that 72 megawatts becomes available, that does not satisfy all the contingency needs. The amount of contingency needs is 172 megawatts. The single largest contingency is 100 megawatts of transmission off the DC intertie. The second largest contingency is the 72 megawatts that you gain in 2027. So we would need to cover, if you want to assume the peak load doesn't grow from 346 megawatts, and the IRP says otherwise, but if you take that 346 and you add 172 to it, you're at 520 megawatts, and that's about how much resources, and it goes up from there, that GWP needs to have available.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions, Commissioner Jasmadarian? Commissioner
No,
Kadikian?
that's it.
Thank you. Commissioner Kadikian?
Thank you. Thank you, President. I had a question with regards to our participation in the IPP, and where we gained about 72 megawatts of transmission. You indicated some people chose not to participate in that project. Now, the question may not be related to this particular thing, but I want to know, why did other people choose not to participate in the IPP project? Was it because it was gas or hydrogen? What was the reason, if you know?
Mr. President, Mr. Chairperson, members of commission, while I think I know, I haven't vetted the answer to everyone that decided to get out, but the people that got out were part of the CAISO. And the CAISO mechanism is very different than the LA Balancing Authority. The LA Balancing Authority takes generation at the source, uses its transmission, and brings it to the load. In the CAISO, it's not necessarily that way. Once it gets into California, it's deemed delivered, and the CAISO manages transmission. So that was the primary reason why the CAISO participants got out. That gave us a good opportunity to be able to increase our share of IPP. And because we increased our share of IPP, the transmission is linked to percent ownership share or quasi-ownership share of IPP, so we were able to maximize that benefit.
And the IPP, when we're talking, that's the northern line that comes down to Glendale. Is that correct, or am I wrong?
No, that's incorrect. That's part of the AC line. When we said we have 100 megawatts on the AC isn't one line. There's a couple of different lines. There's actually 5 lines that come into the LA basin. But for simplicity reasons, we consider that one line, and it's part of that one line. It comes from Atlanta to or from Utah. So there's a high voltage DC line that goes from Delta, Utah to Atlanta, goes through a converter station, and then it goes through what they call the VIC LA line, which is 5 transmission lines that Los Angeles owns that brings it into the basin.
What kind of event would cause us to lose that 72 megawatt transmission that we gained by participating in this IPP?
Wildfire is a perfect example of why you would lose that transmission. It's one line. It's a DC line, so think of it as 2 lines. One's a plus line, one's a minus line. If there's an accident on that line, if something happens to the infrastructure that supports that line, it would go out. If there was an electric disturbance on either the converter stations, you'd lose half of that line. It's possible that happens. It is integral in the voltage stability of the WECC on that line, so it's a critical line, but you still have to manage for half of that line going out.
With regards to alternative 7 and 8, and in particular with regards to the Wasilla engines or the refurbishing of 8A, B, C, any idea on the difference in cost? Is one double the other, or any idea about the cost of either putting the new engines or refurbishing the ones that we have as alternative 8?
Cost estimates for the 2 options are underway. We haven't completed that work. We're in the process of starting to negotiate contracts with Tesla and Wärtsilä. We have their proposals. The work to do the demolition, site improvement, and the other work, that is in the process of being estimated. When we go to City Council in November and come to you before then, the plan is to have costs of the alternatives complete, so you understand both the financial aspects as well as the environmental aspects of both alternatives.
Thank you, Dave. The reason I asked that question is both alternative 7 and 8 from generation point, they're very closely to each other. However, I understand alternative 7 gives you the refinement to be able to turn on less and be more flexible. But I think a cost would be very beneficial to understanding the decisions because between those two. So I would encourage in getting a cost as much as possible on that as well.
Yeah, we will. I'll add, it's, alternative 7 is likely to be the lesser cost option, but, alternative 8 is likely to be the lesser cost option. Alternative 7 brings, like you said, with the Wärtsilä, we can dispatch it in smaller chunks. So there are trade-offs with both.
Right. Yeah. That's all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kadikian. Commissioner Peterson.
Thank you, President Flanagan. On the pro forma views, the photos with the potential view of the proposed project and alternative 7 and 8, the visual impact that they might have, would it normally have visible discharge from the stacks? Because in all the photos, it only showed the various stacks, but didn't show what it might look like when in operation.
I think it was ironic that there was clouds in the picture. No, there's no visible discharge out of the stacks.
Thank you. And then my second question is, show the extreme lack of understanding that I have probably of underlying physics and thermodynamics, but the IPP project we're looking at is that it was projecting to go ahead and use solar and wind to then take it to do reverse osmosis to separate out the hydrogen from water, and then use the hydrogen in fuel cells or burn it, I take it, to then generate electricity. How do you get past the sort of second law of thermodynamics where wouldn't it be, if you're able to generate enough power to generate enough hydrogen to then generate power, wouldn't it be more efficient to just go directly with the renewables and not lose the inefficiencies and the entropy?
Oh, that's a great question. What we plan on doing is we plan on using excessive green energy, so energy that we don't need to meet load to, because we're going to be we'll have excess solar and wind in that area. We'll use that to create electrolysis, to create hydrogen. There's salt caverns in that area, which is very unique to that area. And we'll be pushing the hydrogen into the salt caverns. And then what we'll do is we'll use that hydrogen for nighttime generation. So it's really about shifting the generation curve from the middle of the day, which is where solar is its strongest, to be able to use it at night, to be able to do the things that we need and to be able to get to 100% clean without the ability to store, whether it's hydrogen or batteries or water. Without the ability to store, we would be deficient generation at night. So you are right that it is going to be very expensive to create hydrogen. They say that it takes three megawatts to create 1 megawatt of hydrogen. But if we have excess generation that's created by solar or wind that would normally go to waste, we can utilize that to create the hydrogen. So there should be some synergies there where the value of that megawatt at night far exceeds the 3 megawatts during the day.
So what I'm hearing is that what makes this all feasible, again, is the excess renewable generation during daytime, coupled with the ability to store the hydrogen so that you start out at the small amount of hydrogen production over time, and then you have a storage capacity that then allows you to be able to generate at night at the levels that you need to power the demand requirements at night. Is that a fair summary?
That was better that you said it than I did.
Great. Well, thank you for answering those questions. That's all I have for now, President Flanagan.
Thank you, Commissioner Peterson. I'm glad we've covered the second law of thermodynamics in this meeting. It's comforting to know that we're handling that. And I'll just start off my comments. But first off, thank you for all the work that's gone into this. And those of you who've been working on this for years, I commend all of your efforts. And I'll just start off with a little bit of a disturbing comment that I heard from someone in the community who said, my God, we could be building the last gas plant in California. And I thought, no, that couldn't possibly be. There must be other utilities that are building a similar capacity. I understand system dynamics, what we need to keep a system resilient. But that's a little bit disturbing that potentially we are, if we move forward with repowering with any thermal capacity that uses fossil fuels, that we could be leaving a little bit of a legacy for us here. And I'm glad somebody brought up Copenhagen, Denmark earlier. And you know, I've traveled to cities around the world that really have maximized their energy efficiency and their thermal efficiency, and it's very obvious when you go there. It's omnipresent, and it makes me think that I doubt that we have really fully tapped the local resources that I think perhaps in hindsight we might wish that we had, that we would want to leave a legacy of a community that took really bold action on climate. And I think we're taking strong action on climate even with these alternatives, but I'm not sure we're taking bold action on climate. I'm discouraged that the Sunrun contract hasn't been finalized. You know, that's capacity that we needed last year. Those are kilowatt hours, green kilowatt hours that we could be putting into our system. I think we could double the size of that. We haven't gotten our commercial solar program going. I know the IRP called for 10 megawatts. There's probably significant multiples of that in our community. With Commissioner Peterson, who's at Glendale Community College District, we've talked about hillside solar. We talked in our last meeting last week about solar on the landfill. We haven't really introduced a community solar program yet. There's interesting demand response programs. I know we're starting out some, and I applaud that. I'm thrilled that we have our first demand response event tomorrow. Interesting programs like Ohm Connect, I don't know if you've all heard of it, which is tapping into individuals, households to provide capacity, not just from air conditioning, for turning off other loads in the house as well. Admittedly, I'm an energy efficiency guy, and so I'm not at all sure that we have fully tapped the community spirit that would be required to have a campaign where we become a truly green community, like a Copenhagen, Denmark, or a Freiburg, Germany, or a Carbondale, Colorado, or Boulder, Colorado. Some of these communities, Portland, Oregon, that have really stepped up and moved efficiency and distributed energy resources to a much higher level. So I guess that's a bit of a preamble. But a comment that I have is it's fantastic that we've gone from 240 megawatts to 238 megawatts along this path, now to 93 megawatts. And do we need the 93 megawatts? Do we need the 5 units? Have we fully vetted that in the past year to look at the current conditions? I think there's another 25 megawatts of transmission capacity coming in from DWP. Do we really need that 93, or could we make do with 3 units or 4 units? I appreciate that Commissioner Kadikian brought up the cost. I think it'd be very interesting to know, you know, sort of this winding road. What was the projected cost of the original repowering project? It doesn't have to be exact. We as commissioners would appreciate probably to the closest 10 million or something would be adequate. But then what is the cost of alternative 7, and what is the cost of alternative 8? I have a question about the useful life or the projected life. What is the life of Unit 9? How many more years do we have? How many more years do we have with alternative 8? If we refurbish units, what is it, 8A and 8BC, how many years will those plants be operable? And maybe, can I just ask that question right now?
Yes, sir. It's really not years. It's run hours. So if we're not going to run it and we're only using it for extreme heat conditions or for reliability, we might not need to run it very much. I'm hoping that we don't. I think the chart that you saw shows a 90% reduction in MMBTU use. So we don't anticipate running it, so it would live a long time if that were the case.
Like, for example, the Wärtsilä engines, I imagine, have a useful life of 30 or 40 years. Would the refurbished units also have 30 or 40? I appreciate what we said about runtime. I'm just wondering, is it comparable?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe they are.
Okay. And then in terms of runtime, I appreciated those the chart that showed the approximately 10 million BTUs for the proposed project, and then alternative 7 and alternative 8 being a tenth of that. And that's based on, what runtime is that based on? I mean, is that a certain number of hours? It must be a certain number of hours per year.
Yeah, that's correct. For the Wärtsilä engines, I believe it's like 1,500 hours per year per engine. So for both cases, alternative 7 and 8, it comes out to about 15% capacity factor. So even if you ran all 5 engines to their maximum hours, that doesn't total up to a year's worth of running. You know, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And what if would we permit for that amount of runtime, or
Yeah,
would we permit for more than that?
No, that's what the permits have already been submitted to South Coast. We had to put permits in, and those were the hours and the starts that we permitted are described in the draft DIR.
Right. So people that live in that community around the plant don't need to worry that they permitted for a relatively small number of hours, shorter run time, and then that gets changed over a few years, and the neighboring utilities are all begging to use the plant's capacity. And
those are the hours and starts that we put in, and Glendale will get an air permit that says for each unit, here's the hours and the allowed starts.
Thank you.
So the one I'd just like to add to your comment about the life, when most people talk about 30-year life, that's just to piggyback on what Mark was saying, that's 30 years of being used. Okay, when you consider the fact that we're permitting at a 15% capacity factor, 1 year of use is really more like turns into 7 years. And so like you look at the 8 units, for example, or even look at the older units, rotating machinery has a long life because it's just particularly like the gas turbines. They just sit there and turn.
It's sort of not a good thing in this case, though, because we're trying to phase out gas.
I understand,
So
but I'm trying to address your
I was hoping
point.
you guys were going to tell me that the refurbished units have about a 10-year useful life, and then they'll be toast, and that'll cost a whole lot less to do, and then we'll be out of gas altogether, as opposed to building the Rice units or the Wärtsilä units and having 30 years of amortization in front of us.
Unit 8 refurbished would probably have a life longer than 10 years.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Dave, were you the one talking about the hydrogen purchase, or was that one of your colleagues? Did I hear you right that we're going to start off with a 25% blend of hydrogen in these units, or was I dreaming?
It was 30% by It's 30% by volume of Intermountain Power Project.
Yeah, that's IPP.
Okay.
Right now, there is no hydrogen supply to Glendale.
Okay, so let's talk about that. These engines, I believe we asked this before, and these engines can be converted or can take renewable natural gas and or hydrogen. Is that correct or incorrect?
That's correct. So the Wärtsilä engines currently, they're able to run engines on a blend of hydrogen and natural gas, and their goal, like with the gas turbine manufacturers, is to get to 100% hydrogen. My understanding is they're not quite there yet.
Right. And I take it renewable natural gas they could take right away if we could purchase RNG, or if the price of RNG becomes competitive, they could burn that.
Yeah. That's yes. Presumption is the RNG you get meets SoCal's, California Rule 30 standards. Yes.
Right. But there is potentially a use. I mean, this goes back to my opening comment about building the last gas plant in California. There is potentially a means to convert those units to renewable natural gas and ultimately to hydrogen, so that we are not having the fossil fuel dependency that is, I think, alarming to people in the community.
Yeah, I think for both alternative 7 and 8, RNG is looked at as once it becomes widely available, that's what you would use. Alternative 8 probably can't run on hydrogen. Alternative 7, can work on a blend today. I'll say there's 2 parts to that equation. One is having the equipment that can burn the hydrogen, and the other part of it is having the hydrogen supply. Sure. And that's the other part of the equation.
Yeah, it's fascinating as I look around the world, all of the infrastructure that's being built for hydrogen right now. It's I think it's coming on a lot faster than any of us would have thought. We were talking about resiliency in the city and Grayson providing resiliency in the city. Would alternatives 7 or 8 carry the city with the
No,
capacity of Grayson?
what I was talking
Lose
about there was,
transmission? No.
no, the original, no. What I was talking about there of the resiliency had to do with the Glendale switching station. Okay, the Glendale switching station is being added to provide a backup to Kellogg, a secondary nexus, if you will, for the distribution lines going out to the various substations in the city. And the generation, whether it's alternative 7 or 8, both, either alternative, the generators would be able to connect to Kellogg or a Glendale switching station. So, but no, if the city was separated from the grid, then alternative 7 and 8 don't have enough capacity to carry the city.
Whereas the proposed project could?
Yeah, that was basically one of the requirements. The proposed project at the 262 megawatts plus 50 megawatts, 48 megawatts from Unit 9, you couldn't have carried the full city on a peak load day, but on a lot of days you could have carried the city. Obviously, having less megawatts available with 7 and 8, that it's a fewer number of days, and you're getting down. At 93 megawatts, you're pretty much at minimum load for the city. Am I correct, Mark?
That's correct. That's
Yeah,
close.
so you're even on a cold day, if Glendale was separated from the grid, I don't think you could well, it's really Mark's call, but you'd be challenged, I would think, to operate with just 7 or 8. You could do it while you still have the batteries, but after 4 hours and the batteries are gone, you're turning people off.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Okay.
That concludes my questions. Chairman Bartrosif, I pass the baton to you.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and take any questions or comments from the Sustainability Commission. Anybody want to go first? I see Jennifer, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to staff and the consultants. I think I neglected to thank you at our last meeting. I'll preface with a couple comments, and then I do have some specific questions. Like to echo what the previous speaker said. Although costs typically are not part of a DER or EIR, it would be very helpful to have costs presented because those costs do impact decisions made by council. We heard climate change and resiliency, but I'm concerned that we're still too wedded to gas through these proposals. And also long distance transmission makes us highly vulnerable. It does not make us more resilient. So that is another factor very much concerning me. If we want to be more resilient, we need much more of our power strictly from local sources in case of fires, in case of, all sorts of acts. Reliance on long distance transmission is a very old kind of utility model, and I think we need to switch away from that. Plus, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the average loss of electricity over transmission lines is about 2%. So I wonder if your EIR has downgraded for that loss from long distance transmission of power. It's one comment. These questions are probably best directed to Mr. Young. On slide, it was 33 about the IPP. Glendale's 2019 power content label shows 3% coal. My question is, I assume that's all sourced from IPP. Is that correct?
That is correct.
The 3% coal? Okay. My couple comments on the IPP. So they're converting that plant. They're not even going to start the construction phase at the IPP until 2025, if I'm correct. And that plant will not be a hydrogen plant until 2045. That's many, many years away. That just seems highly too speculative to me. Are we going to be increasing our purchase of natural gas from the IPP as it goes through this transition? Because it will not go from coal to hydrogen. First, it becomes a gas plant, is my understanding. So are we do we plan to increase our purchase of gas from IPP at all in those intervening years?
So Commissioner Pinkerton, I think you have a misunderstanding. IPP will be repowered by 2025, not starting in 2025. In 2025, 30% of the output of IPP by volume will be sourced by hydrogen. So we'll be moving away from coal to hydrogen and natural gas at that particular time. Will we be buying natural gas to transition from natural gas to hydrogen at IPP? That's correct, but remember, we won't be buying coal anymore.
Right, but will we be buying more natural gas? And I just read an article where they quoted the GM, and it's cited 2045. So if you could provide me a link showing a different end date for when that plant will be fully, will be a hydrogen plant, that would be really helpful. But again, I just feel like we're too wedded to gas. I would like to see more local resources. I would like to see the $40 million for the Shoal Canyon plant used for PV or other local renewables. Thank you.
Did you want
I think the misunderstanding is by 2045, IPP will be 100% hydrogen. By 2025, it'll be 30%, and it'll ramp up to 100% by 2045.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Rondi, I see your hand up.
Yes, hello. I'm Rondi Werner, Vice Chairman of the Sustainability Commission, and I have two questions. Last August, the Sustainability Commission heard a presentation from a group that is lobbying pretty hard to ban natural gas for new construction and major remodels for both commercial and residential development. Was the possibility of having a substantial influx of all-electric buildings taken into account when you were calculating how many megawatts of energy would be needed to power the city in the future?
That's a very good question. With the electrification of vehicles and building electrification, we anticipate our peak can go north of 450 megawatts. I've heard nationally that a good rule of thumb is to double your load for electrification of vehicles and then double your load again for building electrification, but that doesn't really apply in Southern California. It's really northeast where it's very cold. So we anticipate going just shy of 500, 450 to 500, and I believe that's in the integrated resource plan.
Great. And my second question was whether the committee considered the visual impact of the project. Like, did they consider mitigating it with visually screening it by using large trees? I've worked on projects where that's been very effective, but I'm not sure what the heights are of the stacks and that kind of thing, but I just wondered if that was explored.
I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that if you were on San Fernando looking at Griffith Park today, which you can't, you would be able to see Griffith Park if this repower to go into effect. By taking the old building down, you would actually be able to see Griffith Park. And I believe in the EIR, you can see a picture of what it would look like from San Fernando. So the impact is a lot less.
Sure, thank you. No further questions.
Thanks, Rondi. Anybody else on the Sustainability Commission have questions?
Yes, I do. I apologize. I couldn't find the button to raise my hand digitally. What are the construction timelines? How do they differ between alternatives 7 and 8?
They're not too different. With the assumption that when we go to city council in November, one of the alternatives is selected, then we would start demolition. There's a couple of months of work to separate Unit 9 from the rest of the units so that Unit 9 can operate in a standalone basis while the rest of the plant is being demolished and the replacement units constructed. Demolition would start in March of next year, and that would extend for about a year. And then the construction period is about a year and a half after that. And so probably the first units, the goal is to have the first units available to help serve load for summer of '24 and, finish by the fall of '24.
Thank you. That answers my additional questions as well. I appreciate that.
Sorry, just a quick clarification. That's for both alternatives? That timeline that you articulated, summer 2024 is for 7 and 8?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Within a few months, and within a few months, there's still details we worked out.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for that question. Hike?
Sure, yeah. A couple of quick questions, if you don't mind. In preparation for SB 100 and the requirement to deliver 100% electric retail sales to customers, how much of the thermal generation will we still need beyond 2045, given that, we're going to have capacity with IPP and possibly even Unit 9. I don't know if they'll survive till 2045. I'm concerned that we may have orphaned resources at some point.
I think the expectation is that load is going to expand as we start to shift our reliance of fossil fuels from transportation and heating. That reliance will go to the utility. So we anticipate the utility load to go up. We're also looking for renewable gas, whether it be RNG or hydrogen, to be able to make that unit a viable solution post 2045. So I don't believe it'll be a stranded asset.
But in terms of capacity, megawatts, how much do you think will we need beyond 2045 of thermal generation?
I don't know. 2045 is very far away. They might put a mini nuke in Burbank. Who knows? Maybe. I don't know. Sorry, I was trying to make a little joke. Maybe that didn't fly very well, but.
All right. The next question I have on slide 33, comparing both alternatives, the cancer health risk is less under alternative 8, 0.014. Even though the CO2 emissions are more compared to alternative 7. Can you explain that? And alternative 7 is a hybrid engine. 5 were still internal combustion engines that can be ramped up incrementally. The CO2 levels that you indicated, do they take into consideration that it's not going to be all or none?
Yes. So first on the cancer risk, that's due to the difference in dispersion coming out of the stacks. The gas turbines, 8A and 8BC, alternative 8, those have a lot of volume coming out of the stack, and it's higher velocity, so you get better dispersion, and so the cancer risk is lower locally. With alternative 7, the Wärtsiläs, those are not mass flow machines processing a lot of mass like a gas turbine does. And so the stack velocity is lower, so you don't get as good dispersion. And so that's why you see the higher cancer risk numbers on alternative 7. I would like to reiterate, though, what Michael talked about and Carl, and that when you look at those numbers and you think about what the CEQA threshold is for significance, those numbers are very small. The risk is very small. To your point on the CO2, What you're seeing there, the CO2 numbers are lower on the Wärtsilä engines because they are more efficient. When for alternative 8, 8A would be a simple cycle unit. 8BC would be a combined cycle unit. So 8A and 8BC, when they run 8BC for the first couple hours, are less efficient than a Wärtsilä engine. Once 8BC gets into its combined cycle mode and is producing an extra 20 megawatts just by recovering the waste heat, then 8BC is more efficient than a Wärtsilä unit. So we modeled how the units would be dispatched, starts per day, operating hours, and the CO2 emissions that you see are a result of that modeling. Does that answer your question?
That does.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Hike?
No, that's it.
Okay, thank you. I did have some questions and comments. One thing that I couldn't quite wrap my head around was this additional 73 megawatts of transmission that's coming into the city by 2027, and how that changes our calculation for this EIR that did not take into account that additional capacity. So am I getting it right that we expect 73 megawatts in 2027 that we were not expecting before, and yet the proposal to put in these 5 RICE engines is not changing? Can I get confirmation on that and how it is or why it is that we are not changing the proposal based on that additional capacity that's coming in?
I think maybe there's a slight misunderstanding. So the original EIR was based on what was then the Siemens Repower, the 2 combined cycle, 2 simple cycle units totaling 262 megawatts. That 72 megawatts wasn't available back then, wasn't part of the calculus, wasn't part of the math. All right. In reducing the size of the project from the 262 thermal down to the roughly 100 megawatts of thermal and the 75 megawatts of batteries, part of what let us get there was the fact that now there's now 72 megawatts of additional transmission that becomes available in 2027. So it was accounted for.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then I know we're also getting 25 from another source by 2024. Is that also factored into this calculation?
That is a developmental thing. We did not account for that. There's a table in the draft EIR in the alternatives section that shows you everything we accounted for in the megawatts.
So Chairperson,
sorry. It's not, the way that's accounted for is in the 200, because that 25 megawatts is not local, it's imported or the transmission. Mm-hmm. So it's not explicitly accounted for. It's part of, that 200 megawatts you get today is a mixture of renewable and fossil resources. So what that 25 megawatts does, it doesn't affect the math. It just displaces 25 megawatts of thermal that's being imported with 25 megawatts of renewable. That's why you won't see it in that table.
Okay.
And to add to that, the Eland project is a non-coincident resource. And what that means is that you could be getting the most energy you can out of that resource during 12 to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Our peak is in the evening, and when it's in the evening, you won't be able to get that resource at all because it's solar.
I see. So if we're expecting that additional capacity, why is it that we're not changing the calculus with the battery storage, for example? So I know I asked last week about Shoal, about our limitations with battery, and that was that we don't have enough transmission or we don't have enough local source of energy to charge the batteries. It seems like this additional capacity would inherently change that calculation. Would it not?
During the day, it's providing renewables over the transmission line. Those projects, I think when you look at the slide, you'll see there's a storage component to it too, right? So part of those renewables get stored, okay? So that battery capacity, because we can't put more than about 75 megawatts in locally of energy storage, because then there just isn't the transmission capacity available at night to both serve load and charge more than that. So those distant projects whose renewable energy is being imported during the day, their excess renewables during the day are used to charge batteries, and the energy off those batteries is imported at night. And that's how you would serve load at night, is off of imported battery energy, imported energy from IPP running off of hydrogen at night, and your local batteries.
Okay.
Today, pretty much, you see all renewable projects going in, solar PV projects. You're now required to have a component of energy storage, and it's to address this whole issue of how do you get enough renewable energy at night?
Okay, thank you for that. I had a question about our use of hydrogen. So you had mentioned that alternative 8, I can't remember if you said probably or probably not, could use hydrogen. It seems like this is a fundamental question that needs to be answered. So do we know for a fact that the RICE units can take clean hydrogen? And same question for the refurbished units. It seems like our decision makers need to know that.
So the Wärtsilä engines today, what Wärtsilä tells us is that they can run on a mix of hydrogen and natural gas. Their goal is to get to 100% natural gas. They're not very different than, the gas turbines. Some gas turbines are almost there already, but everyone's got the goal to get to 100% natural gas. In the case of alternative 8.
I think you mean 100% hydrogen, don't you?
Yes, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Thank you. Yeah, so the goal is to get to 100, they're already at 100% gas. The goal is to get to 100% hydrogen. My apologies.
But we're purchasing these units with the understanding that they can be run on 100% clean hydrogen, and
they're not there. They have not demonstrated that yet. They're working on that.
So we're making an assumption that in the future these will run on clean hydrogen, but we're not certain of that.
That is a goal. It's not a certainty.
Okay.
May I jump to the next question?
And you asked me about
gas turbines can't do that either. So gas turbines can't run on 100%, but they're getting there. So I don't believe any thermal generation can actually run on 100% hydrogen at this particular time. But they are moving in that direction to get there. So if we were to buy the Mitsubishi engines at IPP, the assumption is that they are going to get we have guarantees from Mitsubishi that they will get there. So we would still be talking to Wärtsilä with regard to the transition of their fuel to hydrogen. And it is hydrogen, right? How you make the hydrogen makes it green.
Right.
Yeah, versus blue hydrogen or, and then your question about alternative 8 and the unit 8 ABC, and can they run on hydrogen? And the answer to that is probably no. And the reason is those are older technology engines, and doubtful anyone's going to spend the R&D money to make that generation turbine run on hydrogen. Hydrogen's a gas, but it's a very different gas than natural gas. The flame spread velocity is really different. That affects the combustion dynamics, and you can't just take a gas turbine and turn off the natural gas and turn on the hydrogen and all is well in the world. So that's why there is technology development to get to 100% hydrogen.
Okay. Thank you. I did want to I'm glad Hike asked about the carbon dioxide emissions between 7 and 8. I was also curious about that. I did want to go back to slide 10, if it's not too difficult to put the slide back up, just so the public knows what we're looking at. About Rule 1135. So I know there's an exemption there's like something called the Low Use Exemption. Can we talk about what that means for us here in terms of Grayson and what's being proposed for Grayson?
The low use exemption is pretty stringent in Rule 1135. It allows on a rolling 3-year average 10% utilization. So while it does exist, it's very low. Whether or not that's a practical presumed operating load for any utility, I can't speak to. But do keep in mind, if you're talking 10% utilization in that scenario, you're talking about older generation emission levels, not the 2 ppm and 2.5 ppm NOx levels that the compliant units would be at.
So are you saying that we could use the older units so long as we don't exceed 10% using under the low use exemption?
That is correct. And that becomes a matter of what is an appropriate level of what continues to allow a turbine to be useful to a city at 10%.
Got it. I guess I'm curious then, what is the actual difference between what that 10% capacity is with the 15% that we expect to use with the new units? Is that an actual a large difference in use?
15% utilization on the new units would be lower emissions as far as criteria pollutants or NOx emissions. Should come out to be lower than 10% utilization without modification.
Okay.
There's also an operational perspective to that, because with the 10% utilization, the boiler units, for example, they have a long startup time. Okay, not on the order of minutes like with the recips or alternative 8, but it's hours and days. And so that 10%, you can't compare that directly to the 15% because you get all the 15%, but you're going to lose a significant amount of the 10% on every startup. And so you really get very little out of it. And that's a significant issue. And we looked at the low use exemption, and we basically concluded that was not workable from an practical operating perspective. It wasn't workable.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to clarify that, the district did not presume at any point, to my knowledge, that anyone would retain a boiler and expect to operate it at that utilization. In my comments to you, I was already drawing the conclusion that the boilers would not be retained, and I was comparing Unit 8 today with Unit 8 in the future, controlled.
Got it. Thank you. I do want to dive in a little bit deeper into the 15%, and it sounds like you've already submitted permits to use that amount. Can we get a little bit more information about how we got to that 15%, and for what time horizon is that permit for, and does it factor in these new the transmission lines that are coming in, the virtual power plant, all of the different programs that are being deployed by the city?
Yes, you can go. I don't have the numbers memorized, and if we need to, we can pull up the draft EIR and look at it. But in the alternative section, I believe it's in the alternative section of the draft EIR, yeah. It's all spelled out, and we did build it up from the bottom. And we looked at kind of past experience with hot days, and I think we assumed like 3 hot days in a row, and the start in the morning and start in the afternoon and expected run times, and we built it up from 0 in terms of how many starts and operating hours we're going to need. on each of the units, and that's how we got to 15%. And then after we did that, GWP looked at it from how did that look from their expected dispatch, and it worked, and that's what we put in the air permits.
Okay, so there's a scenario in which we've submitted for 15%, but maybe likely or possibly that we wouldn't be using all 15%.
That's correct. Because we also, on top of that, we put in some amount for contingencies. So we looked at what do we need to do, to cover a series of hot days, and then we put some more on top for contingencies. That's how we got to the 15%, and it's spelled out in a fair amount of detail in the draft DIR.
Or less. Right, on a cool summer, you'd use less. So I think in permitting, you have to look at worst case scenario. So we're looking at a scenario that's still doable, because we don't want to handcuff ourselves, because with AQMD, if you exceed that standards, you immediately are forced to shut that unit down. So if we ever got to our limit, we would have to shut it down regardless of the effect of the community or not. So we want to make sure that we have enough operating margin to be able to do what we need to do, but we already know to keep the units off as long as possible and use them when load is in excess of our import capability.
Okay, thank you. And so this may be my last question for now. I do want to make sure we get to public comment, and I might have follow-ups after that. But are we factoring in the necessity for having, let's say we move forward with 7 versus 8, and we want to proceed with 5 new units? Is there a phase-in portion to this where we could possibly install 1 or 2 units and use those at a higher frequency so that we're not investing in 5 units that we're only using 15% of the time? And what are there associated cost savings to that? I'm thinking about the long term. We've talked about we want to eventually transition out of using natural gas at all, of course. So we're at this point where, we're constantly going to be asking, do we really need this? So do we really need 5 units of new units that are burning natural gas, and can we do with less?
So there's 2 aspects to that. One is energy and one is power. All right. So the number of units is driven by the amount of power that we need. So each unit you take off reduces the available power to help address a peak load situation. All right. And then the hours are not transferable between units. So as you lop off a unit, you lose 1,500 hours of generation off of that unit, off of the whole plant. So, number of units, the reason we don't have 1 unit permitted for 8,000 hours, for example, because 1 unit operating for 8,000 hours is more than the 5 units operating for 1,500 hours. And the reason we didn't do that is because 1 unit is woefully short of helping us meet peak load and cover contingencies. So that's why there's the number of units there are. It's driven by the power need. And then the hours came out of the energy need.
Thank you for clarifying that. And then I did want to just get clarification. I guess I misunderstood something. I thought that the 72 megawatt transmission line was factored in post IRP, 2019 IRP. Is that not the case? We always factored in that 72 megawatts as part of this analysis?
I don't believe that was factored in the IRP, but it was factored in the modeling that we ran for this, for this project.
I know the 72 is in the IR. I wasn't involved directly in the IRP, so.
Okay, and the 25 Eland project as well?
In the IRP?
In either?
Not in the IRP. We just signed the contract for both of those projects the last couple of months. And the
Okay.
IRP was a couple of years.
Okay, so it's not in this EIR?
It is implicitly, because right now, like the 200 megawatts of imports today is a mixture of renewables, like what you get. There's a geothermal project in Nevada, Hoover. So it's a mix of renewables and fossil. Okay, that 25 megawatts is renewable energy that's going to get imported, and that's going to displace existing fossil that's being imported. So when you go to the draft DIR and you look at that megawatt table I was talking about in the alternatives section, and you'll see transmission imports, it's buried in there. The assumption is that over time, those transmission imports are going to move from a mixture of fossil and renewable to all renewable.
Okay, so we're getting the same amount of energy, but we're getting it from different sources.
Right.
Or different types of energy.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. The only other thing I wanted to say, I mean, it's kind of going along the lines of what Ted had said earlier is, you know, the whole thing is ironic because all within the span of 7 days, where the city of Glendale is now talking about investing heavily in 2 new natural gas power plants. And between those 7 days, we have our neighbor, the city of LA, committing to 100% renewable by 2035. And I was skimming through the LA 100 study that was made available to the public in March of this year. And it goes pretty deep into all of the alternatives, scenarios, local source, transmissions. The executive summary alone is 70 pages, and I can't absorb all this information, but it talks about local sources, the various types of local sources, battery storage, all the various alternatives and their associated costs. And I feel like we're in this moment here in the city of Glendale where we are talking about natural gas plants and how they factor into our future needs. And it just seems like it's cart before the horse kind of thing. Like, why aren't we going through an exercise of understanding how we can get to 100% renewable and working our way backwards from that? And maybe that's happening, but that's not clear to perhaps me and the public. There seems to be some confusion around that in the context of these 2 new natural gas power plants. So I had another question, but it's been lost. So maybe we can move to public comment, and I reserve the right to come back, if that's okay with you, Ted.
That is perfectly fine.
President Flanagan, if I may just make one comment. The Shoal Canyon project is not a natural gas project. It's a renewable project.
Mixed,
Not natural gas.
Sure, but there's a mixture of natural gas as part of it, isn't there? We're going to continue to rely on natural gas as a mixture as part of that power plant. Increasingly over time.
If the concentration falls below, what was it, 34% or 32%, we have to inject natural gas, I believe.
The goal is never to make that a natural gas plant, but this is the Grayson Repower project discussion.
I understand. Thank you.
Let's move to public comment. And Catalina, do we have any?
We do. We have 8.
We have 8.
Yes.
So shall we follow our longstanding tradition of last week and limit comments to 3 minutes? Is that acceptable to you, Chairman Bartrosif?
Yes.
Is that okay? Comments, make them short and sweet and punchy and convincing and within 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, I will. Our first caller is Stephanie McGreevy. Stephanie, you're on the air.
Hi, my name is Stephanie McGreevy, and I'm a citizen of Glendale and work in the clean energy industry. I have comments regarding the technologies being proposed for the Grayson Repowering project because there's cleaner, more efficient, more affordable, commercialized, and proven technologies for power generation, fuel types, and for battery storage. I believe GWC is required to disclose cleaner, more affordable options to the city of Glendale 60 days prior to purchasing any equipment. Starting with the Wardella internal combustion power generators, these are outdated and dirty technologies. Better technologies actually do exist. Utilities, universities, and businesses like Edison, Caltech, and Walmart have turned to cleaner, more affordable, reliable, responsive technologies like fuel cells that can operate with 100% renewable natural gas, or RNG, 100% hydrogen, or a mix of both. These fuel cells were developed and manufactured in California and more cost-effective. Fuel cells are quieter and emit zero NOx, SOx, and particulates because they use an electrochemical process to generate electricity without any combustion, no moving parts. Fuel cells can produce electrons for about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. Should the city elect not to procure RNG, then carbon capture can be added to the technology. Next is fuel. We have renewable natural gas, or RNG, that meets Rule 2130 for pipeline quality natural gas from digested dairy manure and land gas spill. It carries a low carbon intensity or another CI value and can be procured to replace pipeline natural gas. The lower the CI rating, the less carbon that's released. Anything below zero means carbon already exists in the atmosphere and is being reused. Digested dairy manure rates at a negative 250 CI rating. The reason is that digesters divert manure from open lagoons that would have normally vented methane to the atmosphere. Methane is much more effective to holding heat than CO2 is. Preventing 1 molecule of methane from reaching the atmosphere is equivalent to 32 molecules of CO2, which accounts for the negative CI value for dairy RNG. Next up, for the lithium-ion battery systems like Tesla's, we have multiple cases of overheating, exploding, and catching fire. The latest fire in Australia a few months back burned for 4 days and took 150 firefighters to contain the fire. The fire was never put out. They had to let it burn itself out. In the meantime, all the surrounding neighborhoods received toxic air alerts. Vanadium flow batteries are a simple mixture of vanadium ions, which are abundant and easily collected in a self-contained, non-flammable solution. The redox flow battery is not limited in runtime and can run for 24 hours, 7 days a week with unlimited cycles. It does not degrade, and it has a frequency response of a couple hundred of milliseconds. Lithium-ion degrades over time, has strict guidelines for usage with limited cycles and downtime between cycles, preventing the user from full benefit of power storage and limiting the ability to future-proof. The redox flow battery is 100% recyclable and non-toxic. Glendale can take advantage of energy savings performance contracts, which are zero out-of-pocket, no capital expenditure. It's an operational, off-the-book expense. All these solutions are commercially available, reliable, and carry a smaller footprint. They provide redundancy, are scalable to meet increasing demand, and are more economical. These solutions should be a part of Glendale's bold actions. Please feel free to contact me for additional information.
Thank you very much for your comment. Next caller, please.
Our next caller is David Denig. David, you're on the air.
Hello, thank you for taking my call. I have a brief comment to make. The overall objectives listed in the DIR on page 110 through 111 are focused on reliability, control, and flexibility. All objectives that are probably top of mind to GWP staff and engineers. But what about the goal that has become increasingly urgent to transition to 100% clean energy? The IPCC report says the time for action is now. Glendale should prioritize the maximum possible clean energy generation, and it's not clear from this report that every option has been explored to expand clean energy, especially distributed clean energy and innovative programs that combine lots of solar with storage. We shouldn't rush to approve a plan that meets engineers' objectives, but not the community's aspirations. Aspirations for clean air, clean energy, and a future livable climate. Please go back to the drawing board and do not approve this DIR. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
Our next caller is Roberta Medford. Roberta, you're on the air.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I'm calling from Montrose. My comment is that from the UN to the President of the United States down to little old me, it is so clearly code red right now for our climate, in that if we don't take action now, climate change will be irreversible. Yet here we are hearing something very similar from GWP that we heard over 3 years ago. I am very disappointed that in apparent defiance of City Council direction, the GWP is once again trotting out major new fossil fuel spending while having done actually very little in the way of action in the way of clean energy. This lack of urgency about the climate crisis on the part of our publicly owned utility is completely unacceptable to me. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next comment, please.
Our next caller is Kate Unger. Kate, you're on the air.
Hello, thank you, commissioners and staff. It's Kate Unger. I'm calling from the Pelanconing Estates area, close to the Grayson power plant. I've been following this project since 2018, and I will say I appreciate the presentation. I have some comments on the project and on the EIR. I echo questions from the commissioners and comments from other people. I did want to start by mentioning that in July 23rd, 2019, when the IRP was approved, the presentation didn't mention that it was approved with conditions. The City Council wanted staff to move forward with the plan with 5 units as a starting point, not an end point. And they specifically asked for options to reduce or eliminate the need for those units. They asked GWP to develop a plan for goals or methods to achieve 100% clean energy by 2030. As Chairperson Bartrus mentioned, like the LA 100 plan, that's what we asked for. That's what Council asked for. We didn't get that. I will not go on with detail, but you know that GEC has been asking for additional clean energy locally, and it just hasn't happened. It's incredibly frustrating. So here we are with this project, adding new natural gas. Okay, guys, this is insanity. It's insanity. If we want to preserve anything close to the life and earth that we all know and care about, we have to stop doing this. Every week there's more news about how drastic the climate crisis has become. The latest, a new report just from yesterday in the journal Nature that says we have to stop global coal and oil use immediately. If we don't do this, then we're going to have only a 50% probability of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, even if we do that. So we need to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And how can we be thinking about putting in new gas burning equipment? It is crazy. We have the obligation to not commit to new fossil fuel burning capacity. We are talking about the stability of the global ecosystem. Okay, the environmental analysis in the PRDEIR, using a 3-year-old EIR that analyzed the project we all know is no longer in consideration. It cut corners and meant that the analysis of the present alternative is truncated, and it's confusing. We have to triangulate back to an old document. You all watched the presentation that listed the impacts of old project and compared the alternative to that instead of to each other. The document doesn't allow for a real understanding of these alternatives head to head, and that's what we need. And we do also need the cost information. I appreciate you asking for it. We need to insist on having that. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Our next caller is Bert Colbert. Bert, you're on the air.
Hello, Commissioners and staff. Thanks for taking my call. I'm calling about the EIR, obviously. The Workville makes the 50S, which we're buying, or you're proposing to buy. They have to make the 50DS, which takes gas and biodiesel. So why wasn't that explored as an alternative? Biodiesel would be at least carbon zero, or net carbon zero, but wasn't even studied. Why was there no study of additional transmission lines? You basically just throw it out without even going into it. I don't know why. Obviously, LA is planning on going 100% clean energy. How are they going to do it? Maybe they're going to do new transmission lines as well that we can piggyback on. I agree with the last caller about lithium versus vanadium. Vanadium is also smaller and has lower risk of fire, so you could probably fit more megawatts in the space that you're dedicating to lithium in the current plan. Let's see. How about turning the transmission lines coming into Glendale into HVDC? I think you could get more power through that. The last plant built, so if we're going to build the last gas plant for Glendale, that means we're going to have the last plant standing. So Emerald Green Glendale is going to be the last city in California with their own power plant. Pasadena is going to lose theirs. The city next door starts with a B. They're going to lose theirs as well, and we'll still be generating this gas. Ridiculous. I'm a citizen of Glendale. I'm part owner of GWP, and I say no new gas. Period. Hydrogen, which you're proposing to go to, has less power or less therms. And so have you considered how your engines would be derated, and thus your max peak power out of the plant would be reduced when you go to hydrogen? I don't think you have. And why was Kellogg Switching Station added to this project? It seems like a different project that should be get its own EIR. And once again, why did you split up Shoal Canyon and this plan? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next caller.
Our next caller is Kat Talardi. Kat, you're on the air.
Hi. My name's Kat, and I am a woman in my 30s considering starting a family in Glendale. I am concerned about the pollution and the climate. I'm honestly in tears a lot of days because I'm scared to bring children onto the planet right now. I do not want to continue investing in dirty energy. I want to invest in clean energy. Now, I'm looking at the air quality index for Glendale today. I'm looking at a couple sites on AccuWeather. It's listed as 64, and that is defined as poor. The air has reached a high level of pollution and is unhealthy for sensitive groups. And this is on a good day. This isn't during fire season or, a fire that has happened, right, last year. So I'm concerned about the air quality in general in Glendale, and I don't want to contribute and invest in anything that's going to make that worse. I totally understand the need for a just transition out of fossil fuels, but there really isn't the time to be dainty about this. Scientists have proven time and again that fossil fuels are emitting carbon that is causing our climate to change and our temperatures to rise, and not just by a degree or two. I mean, if we look at the Portland and British Columbia heat waves this year, those were 7 or 8 degrees higher than they'd ever been. So, 486 people died in British Columbia. The bridges started to melt in Portland, and and our climate is traditionally hotter than theirs. So what's next for us? It feels really urgent to me, and I understand that maybe people investing in gas are scared to lose money, or that the change feels hard. But I just question you to think about if you have kids or if you want them to be able to have grandkids. It feels very urgent to me. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Our next caller is Monica Campana. Monica, you're on the air.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. My name is Monica Campana. Thank you for your presentations tonight. I'm a Riverside Rancho Glendale resident, and I want to begin by reminding people listening how incredibly hard we residents have had to fight since 2017 to get us down from the original 262 megawatts of gas proposed to where we are now. I want to remind everyone listening that there was a time we sat in meeting after meeting after meeting hearing about how we couldn't do this and we couldn't do that. But with public pressure came political pressure, and that translated to an investigation of new local clean energy options and one round of clean energy proposals. It was the 2019 Integrated Resource Plan presentation
that GWP identified as preferred projects. Out of that came 3 energy projects from the 2018 Clean Energy RFP, a new 75 megawatt battery storage component, and 93 megawatts of gas. This project was based on 200 megawatts of available transmission. Council certified that IRP, but placed conditions on GWP's proposal, as a previous caller noted, asking for staff to push for more renewable power, transmission, and other ways to reduce that gas number. That has not happened. 2 years have gone by, and we're still at the same number. But things have changed. Since that IRP was written, we have secured 72 megawatts of new transmission on our Southwest AC line starting 2027, as we talked about tonight. That's more transmission we could be using to fill batteries for different parts of the evening, early morning hours perhaps. Ascend Analytics has assumed a hypothetical 20 megawatt commercial solar project in their 100% clean energy feasibility study. The city funded an owner's engineer to study solar and storage on city-owned properties. And the Elon project does bring with it its own 25 megawatts of transmission, from what I'm understanding. That's its own transmission. That's more transmission. It's my understanding that project comes with that. So I bemoan the fact that we're sitting here 2 years later with new opportunities on the table, looking at the same two proposals for the same, well, different proposals, but the same amount of gas. I want to remind our commissioners that all this time, since that first round of RFPs, GEC has urged council to request our utilities put forward another round, in particular for the commercial sector. In various formats, public and private, we've offered the results of legwork that took months of our time, mapping huge parking lots and rooftops that could be utilized for solar. We suggested an alliance with GUSD, probably the biggest landowner in Glendale, to work on a battery storage project that could benefit them both. We suggested a REACH ordinance to require solar on multi-story buildings. We collected over 350 contacts for the virtual power plant, which has not yet launched. We urged the utility and council to keep looking for more projects so we would not be in a position where we were pressed up against the wall with no new solutions. So again, I'm bemoaning the fact that here we are, apparently against the wall with no solution. So please, commissioners, when you're asked to do so, I ask you to recommend to City Council that they reject this project proposal, both of them, and hold to their request for a better alternative. Support Council's 2019 request for less gas. Support Council's desire to power ourselves with 100% clean energy sooner than 2045, which they have signaled they desire in multiple ways.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Our next caller is Elise Kafayan. Elise, you're on the air.
Hello, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. This month, anticipating this fall's many global climate meetings, more than 200 medical and public health journals jointly published a call for emergency action to limit global temperature increases, restore biodiversity, and protect health. The editorial warned of increasing health problems due to rising global temperatures and warned ahead of these pivotal meetings, we, the editors of health journals, call for urgent action to keep average global temperature increases below 1.5 degrees centigrade, halt the destruction of nature, and protect health. The environmental crisis demands an emergency response. They go on to say that huge investment will be needed beyond what is being considered or delivered anywhere in the world. I would put this new Grayson Repower plan in the bucket of what the authors disparage as, quote, what is being considered or delivered, unquote. It's not enough at all. I echo Commissioner Flanagan's statement that this isn't a bold plan. I have the same concern as Commissioner Bartrusso as to why we are building all of this expensive gas infrastructure when our surrounding communities are committing to 100% clean energy. The authors mentioned that reduced air pollution is a big problem and say that better air quality alone would realize health benefits that easily offset the global cost of emission reduction. And air quality is a huge issue here, and Grayson is surrounded by residences and sensitive receptors. You know, Glendale Water and Power, as others have commented, has had 2 years since it submitted and City Council conditionally approved its integrated resource plan in 2019. There are no more clean energy projects in this plan. Glendale Water and Power is not operating as if we are in a climate and environmental emergency, and this incremental plan that involves building new gas-burning, air-polluting infrastructure proves it. This plan should be rejected, and a new one proposed that includes dramatically more local solar with storage, which is what Glendale Environmental Coalition has been asking for the past several years. This could have been accomplished if it had been given top priority. Thank you. Please reject this plan.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have other callers?
We do. We have 3 more. Our next caller is David Axember. David, you're on the air.
Good evening, Commissioners and staff. I'd like to thank you for all your patience. And I've read through this document, and it's a lot of pages. And for those of you that put this work together, I'm very impressed. I'd like to ask a question. Hopefully, at the end of this presentation, someone will answer the question. In the document, you know, we kept talking about 15% usage of the facilities. And in the document, I never found 15%. I did find the number repeated of 1,120 hours per year with 280 startups. And if you calculate that, that's 15%, but it doesn't actually say 15%. And that's repeated all through the DEIR and the analysis of the pollution and the analysis of everything. But I tried to read the permits. I even read them tonight during the meeting. And I tried to find out where in the permit, what page of the DEIR does it say that the permits are limited to 15%? And the reason I'm concerned about this, because I seem to remember at another meeting that GWP spokespeople talked about the permit would be higher. And I believe I heard the number 68% of the time. And if the calculations are done on 15%, and the actual permit is 5 times as much, then that's 5 times the pollution, and then that makes the DEIR inaccurate. So what I would like to request from this is I would like somebody from GWP to say which page of the DEIR, the PRDEIR, exactly says on the permit, not on the calculations, but on the permit, where the GWP is limited to that 1,120 hours with the 280 startups. Otherwise, there's no guarantee that, you know, in a year, a year after the construction, they say, well, we have an emergency. We're going to have to run it 30 or 40% of the time if it's not limited by permit. So, again, I'd like to repeat, I'd like somebody from GWP to give me a page number I can look on a permit where it limits the hours of operation to 1,120 plus 280 hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
Our next caller is Francesca Smith. Francesca, you're on the air.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Francesca Smith. I'm privileged to serve on the Design Review Board for the City of Glendale, and I'm a qualified architectural historian. I've been watching tonight. I've been reading alongside all of you. Thank you so much for your hard work. I am very disappointed in this PRDEIR and its technical appendices, especially in the fact that there's not a revised cultural resources technical appendix. The lead agency, after more than 6 months of discussion with the Glendale Historical Society, has at long last conceded that Glendale Grayson Power Plant boiler building is a historical resource for the purposes of CEQA. but failed to provide a thorough evaluation of the property, considering the significance of it and its direct connection to the Glendale switch rack and other parts of the property. The switch rack was constructed roughly concurrently with the boiler building, and in the text of the PRDEIR, every mention of the historical resource is diluted by repetition of the modifier presumptive. It's called a presumptive historical resource everywhere it's referred to, which is intended to lead non-professionals into believing that the property's significance is somehow in doubt. The most important cultural resources related inadequacy is that the document fails to analyze or even address alternatives to the proposed project that would retain the historical resource that was identified at the subject property location. The document needs to describe a reasonable range of alternatives to the proposed project that could feasibly attain the most basic project objectives and would avoid or substantially lessen the project's significant effects. Because it's a historical resource, it absolutely needs to look at specific alternatives, including a smaller project, a project that is in conformance with the standards for rehabilitation, a different location, and it warrants a lot more than the few paragraphs that were afforded it. In the few paragraphs, meetings are described with representatives of the city without any records of when those meetings took place, who attended, what was discussed, and what wasn't discussed, or how the city sort of held out a carrot and then snatched it back. That's the nicest way I can put it. There are lots of power plant buildings that are reused as offices, as museums. They're even used as schools. In looking at the alternatives analysis that we were provided, there is absolutely nothing I could find that showed what the volumes are of what is being studied, as in maps or even diagrams showing why this building, which is in the middle of everything, can't be reused as a building that would serve this property. It's legally inadequate in its description of existing conditions, in that it identifies no character-defining features, as well as the alternatives. The lead agency is attempting to use the PRDEIR as a post-hoc rationalization. Hello?
Sorry, can you wrap up? You're a little over time. Thank you.
Sure, I'm sorry. It's a post hoc rationalization for its predetermination that it can be demolished. It should instead have considered feasible alternatives that could include new construction with adaptive reuse, which is done all over the world. My closing sentiments are that this PRDEIR didn't inform the public the way we need to be to make this decision, and the cumulative impact section is overly narrow and only addresses the three other historic buildings owned by the city of Glendale. TGHS requested a mitigation measure that would have surveyed historic properties, identified historic properties owned by the city, and if that had already been in place, none of this, well, a lot of this would not have taken place.
Okay,
I am
thank you.
absolutely in favor of green energy, and thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for your comment.
Our last caller is Diana Matsushima. Diana, you're on the air.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Diana Matsushima, and I agree with several of the recent speakers in being concerned about this recirculated draft environmental impact report. Yes, inconsistent with the Race to Zero commitments that Glendale made with a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and also with inconsistent with the climate mayor's commitment to uphold the Paris Climate Agreement goals. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as we all know, just issued a dire report warning that we have to take action now. And we should especially disparage any plan that involves building new fossil fuel burning capacity. The There's no new clean energy in this plan, and there isn't looking at more solar and more storage for that. So I think the report should be rejected, and GWP should investigate all options for expanding local solar generation and storage. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comment. Catalina, does that conclude the public comment?
Yes, it does.
Why don't we, because I know that Chairman Bartrosov would probably like to have a few more questions. Why don't we circle back, if it's okay with everybody in the room? I know it's a long meeting, but we're doing well getting through it. But let's circle back through the Glendale Water and Power Commissioners and see if there's additional comments and questions. And then we'll follow with the Sustainability Commission. And after that, we'll adjourn. Commissioner Jasmine, do you have any other additional comments or questions at this time?
No other comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kadikian.
Just a brief question. One of the speakers mentioned about the type of battery, and with regards to the Tesla battery, I know currently Tesla uses lithium batteries, but I think they're starting to also use lithium iron phosphate, which seems a little bit more reliable and has a better shelf life. And I was wondering with regards to GWP, whether any particular decision has been made with regards to the type of the battery or the component or the chemical of the battery.
Thank you. We're going to have a response to that. Please, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, we would probably end up with the phosphate chemistry batteries.
Okay, thank you. No other questions.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Kadikian. Commissioner Peterson, any follow-up questions or comments?
President Flanagan, thank you. Only comment is that I wanted to express my gratitude for the work and the thoroughness that staff has been doing. As being on the Glendale Water and Power Commission, we interact with them on a monthly basis, and topics like this are a little more familiar to us, and possibly we are more aware of the thoroughness of all options that the staff are constantly looking into and considering. And I just want to acknowledge that thoroughness and that effort on their part.
Thank you very much. And I'd just like to thank all those that made comments. I took notes on all of the comments, and it certainly echoes my concerns about the climate crisis and this need for really bold action right now. And utilities have to, in my view, have to take a leadership role in this transition. With that said, I pass it to you, Commissioner or Chairman Bartrosov.
Thank you. Any sustainability commissioners have additional questions or comments? Rondi, I see your hands up.
Yes, I do.
Yes, please, Rondi.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I'm out camping, so excuse the messy background here. But anyway, I wanted to just mention that, obviously we can all agree that the peak demand needs to be flattened in order to reduce the need for the high capacity project, which is of course based on the highest anticipated usage, so we're not leaving anyone in the dark, literally. So I was all excited about the GWP Peak Savings Program. It seemed like a great step in that direction, so I decided to lead by example and sign up for it. First of all, I found it very difficult to find on the website. I just assumed it would be on the front page, save the planet, save money, all that, but I had to spend about 20 minutes looking for it. And then when I did, I was disappointed to find that my smart thermostat is not on the list of supported thermostats. So I was wondering what the plan is. Right now, apparently it's Nest, EcoB, NC, and then Gate Interior, or quote unquote coming soon, not sure when that is. So what's the plan to get all of the meters, thermostats supported? Mine is a Honeywell system, which is supported by LA GWP, so I don't think it's them, but I'm just wondering what obstacles are to having all of them on there, because this seems like a perfect way to be able to flatten that curve and not have to build such a massive project.
Yes, Commissioner Warner. I'm sorry, I don't have that detail on when we'll be able to get all the thermostats in the program, but that's a high priority for Franklin to be able to incorporate that into their software. Their first thought was to pick the ones that the majority of the people had, and unfortunately, there's some people that don't have the majority, but I will get back to you and let you know. And I'm sorry, I didn't get your thermostat. Which thermostat did you have?
Mine is Honeywell.
Honeywell.
Yeah, so that was the other piece of it is like how would a ratepayer find out when they're going to be supported when they go on the website and they see that, oh, there isn't on there, it might be out of sight, out of mind, and you know, check again. So I feel like we're missing an opportunity here.
Understand. What I'll do is I'll take a look at the website to make sure that it's as easy to find as possible, and I'll get back with you as to when the expectation to be able to incorporate the Honeywell thermostat into the program.
Thank you, Rondi. Jennifer, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Alec. For Vice Chair Warner, just ironic that I had signed up for that program and someone knocked on my door a couple weeks ago and said, we're here to do it. So, and switched out my thermostat. It was a good thing. I'm not sure if this would be directed to Mr. Young or to one of the Stantec presenters. One of our callers, I believe Mr. Axember, asked for a page number in reference to, I think it was the 15% as far as run hours or something. Can anybody provide that page number? He said he had looked for that number and that data in the original document and in the recirculated could not find it. So if anybody could find that page number and maybe email our chair, Alec, and let him know so we can get that information out there. And that was it. Thank you.
I'll take that as an action item.
Thank you, Jennifer. Aline, hi, do you have questions? And just in case you're not able to virtually raise your hand.
None from me, thank you.
Okay, thanks. I have some, I think what are quick follow-ups. One thing I did want to get confirmation, Mark, is the 25 megawatts from Elan. So that is confirmed that that is power that was expected as part of this analysis. It is not new power that is not part of the analysis.
That's correct. How we started this process was we indicated that 100% of our transmission capability would be imported power that's renewable. And then we were looking for excess power.
Okay. And then we had talked about the units eventually moving towards hydrogen or a mix of hydrogen. Do we know what the associated cost of those upgrades are going to be and what physical changes need to happen to the units for that transition to occur? And is that cost associated into this or factored into this analysis?
No, sir. I believe that there's a certain percent hydrogen capable when we go ahead and buy it, because we're going to buy, whenever we go ahead and engage with the company, we will get the most advanced technology that they have, which will give us that capability. And as they develop further capabilities, they might have to change the nozzles or they might have to change the firing mechanism in order for them to incorporate the change in the flame pattern of the hydrogen.
Okay, I know just generally speaking, and perhaps something to consider for the next time this comes around, is there have been a lot of questions associated around cost, and I know perhaps it's not part of the typical EIR process to talk about cost, but there's a lot of interest in what these things cost in comparison to alternatives, and quite frankly, I'm not comfortable recommending anything without understanding the associated costs. So hopefully we can come back next time and understand what these costs are to make some informed recommendation to council.
Yes, sir. Our goal is to try to find the best numbers that we can provide council and the commissions when it's time to make that decision.
Great, thank you. And then the question that I had before that had slipped my mind earlier was if we would be so kind to move to slide 11 or showcase that to the public, the Clean Energy RFP slide. You know, we started this process with a need to build a plant that would generate 262, and now we've cut that down drastically to 93. Using these methods that are part of this Clean Energy RFP. I know that over time, since it was initially introduced, the virtual power plant, for example, was, I think, half or something close to half of what we are now expecting to be 25 megawatts. My question is how are we maximizing the megawatts from each and every one of these elements in this Clean Energy RFP to reduce that 93 down even further? And the things that come to mind immediately are commercial, the virtual power plant component for the commercial side of things. And then I'm curious about like the demand response, for example. You know, we're going to do a test run tomorrow, it seems. Are we reaching the number of people that we expect to or hope to? And how are those calculations made? Can we reach more people to make that 10 go to 15? Like, how is that analysis done to determine what the actual caps are for each of these elements?
So for the demand response event that's supposed to happen tomorrow, they'll be able to provide a report to me to find out how many people are involved and what the actual reduction in peak is. So we're still in the infant stage, so people are still having to get the thermostats in play. The ones that already have the thermostats are probably the ones that are in play right now. But if you wanted a thermostat, if my mother wanted a thermostat, she would have to arrange with Franklin to come to the house and to install it. So those things do take a little bit of time. I'm not sure how many. I still think we're not in megawatts. I think we're in the infant stage where we might be at a megawatt. But back to the other question that you had asked, we had asked all three of these companies in the first meeting with them, can you give us more? What is the most that you can give us? And with that, we put a caveat that whatever that number was, we were going to hold you accountable for that number. Because we were going to take thermal generation out of play, we were going to count on that. So these are the numbers that they gave us. These were not the numbers that GWP asked them for. And a 50 megawatt virtual power plant on a 350 megawatt generating load serving entity is huge. It's a big virtual power plant. Sunrun acknowledges it's going to be one of the biggest that they have. At the time of our negotiations with Tesla, it was going to be one of the biggest batteries in the country on a per person basis, on a per resident basis. It still is, if not the world. So we are doing as much as we possibly can and looking at alternative sites and alternative options for us. To say that we've not worked hard to try to get to where we are, I think it doesn't serve us well. We worked very hard to get down to the 93. The 262 megawatt of thermal option, that was going to be able to supply us 99% of the time, even if we were islanded, even if we were a micro grid, which is what Glendale is.
Okay, and can you speak briefly on the commercial piece of it? I mean, to me, it seems like there's so much potential there with industrial property, commercial property. They're obviously so much larger than residential. So how does that play into all of this?
So if there was anything that we were somewhat slower on would be the initiation of commercial, but we are getting out of a pandemic. We are coming back to work. We're dealing with all these other things that we weren't dealing with a year and a half ago. All of these projects that you see right now are all coming to a head at the same time. That was not by design. They were supposed to be staggered, and they were supposed to actually be implemented in 18 and 19 and 20, not all coming in at the same time. So having to juggle all these things is rather difficult. We are looking at the Sunrun is using multifamily residents, which is somewhat of a commercial penetration. So once we start to get that into play, they'll be more comfortable, and we'll open it up and we'll see if they want to expand or if there are other entities involved that would want to participate.
Got it. I'll just end with saying, you know, I understand the enormity of work that entailed getting to where we are today. And as you can tell from the type of calls that we've gotten and the type of comments that we've gotten from the public and from the commissioners, there's a burning desire to get to zero. And we know that you know that. You are the technical experts. I, by no means, am a technical expert in the energy sector. And so, you know, we appreciate all the work that you're doing, but we're always going to be giving you a hard time to get to that zero eventually. So I hope you understand the position that we're in as at least as the Sustainability Commission, to keep advocating and ensuring that we're striving to get to that as quickly as possible. So I appreciate all the work that you've done and hope that you understand the fight that we're fighting to get Glendale to get to zero. So
yes, sir, I do.
You.
I appreciate the check and balance. It's healthy.
Yeah, and we know that there are real world constraints too. You know, there's a reality check in understanding that we can't get to zero tomorrow, that there has to be a transition, and I think most people understand that. So I guess I'll make that clear to folks that that's how I feel at least. Thank you.
Well put. Thank you very much, Chairman Bartrosif, and thank you to staff and to the consultants today and to our attorneys present, Catalina for organizing the meeting. Thanks to our callers for calling in. Could we have the next item, please?
Our next item is 3, adjournment.
Do we have a motion to adjourn, Alec?
Yes.
We'll second that. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you.